The notation a move. King's fourth for white would have to be described thus, e to e4, and for the same move on black's part the description would be e5. Compare diagram number 9. Diagram number 9. Black, c d e f, by 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, I, a b c d e f g h white. The great advantage of the German method consists in its conciseness, and in the lesser probability of a mistake occurring in writing down a move in a game by correspondence, or even in an ordinary game which has to be adjourned, whereas, comparatively more mistakes occur when other notations are used. The fractional notation adopted in the present treatise possesses many advantages. PK for PK4 KKDB3 KKDB3 P underscore Q underscore KDXP 000. The foregoing first three moves in Petrov's defense illustrate the superiority of this system of notation over the old, time-honored method of recording the foregoing moves as follows. 1p to k fourth for fourth, 2k kd to be third or third, 3p to q fourth for fourth, 1p to k fourth for fourth, 2k kd to be third or third, 3 kd takes p, etc. By the present system white's moves are recorded above and black's below the line. The subvariations are inserted as follows, in the form of notes, \v hitch are referred to by numerals, as at black's third move above, it being understood that in the subjoined example it is black's turn to play. 1. K3 px for pks, for kdks, 5 kdx 5 pq.4, etc. XVII the notation. A comma separating white's and black's moves and a semicolon being placed after each move of black. If such subvariation begins with a move of black it is introduced as above with a leader, thus. The letter D marks the diagrammed position. In the January and February, 1889, numbers of the International Chess magazine, Mr. Edwin Anthony of Hereford, England, discusses the subject of chess notation in an interesting manner. He comes to the conclusion that two systems, one arbitrary and the other significant, are alone in use at the present time, despite numerous attempts to overthrow them, and that effort should be directed to considering what improvements can be grafted on these present stems. In pursuance of this plan, he proposes two modifications, one arbitrary and one significant, of the English method of notation, by which every move would be represented by three symbols only. His plan is ingenious and well worthy of consideration, but the difficulties in the way of the introduction of a new notation are serious. To obtain sufficient familiarity with it for ready use, a little time, study and practice would be required on the part of both writers and players, and there is a certain mental inertia to be overcome, which we fear it will be found difficult to do. But the convenience and economy of such a notation are fully demonstrable. The Forsyth notation. This notation is the invention of Mr. David Forsyth, a Scottish amateur. It is fully described in the Chess Players Annual, by Mr. and Mrs. T. B. Rowland, edition of 1889. It is undoubtedly the best method of recording a position, except the diagram. The board is supposed to be placed before the player as is usual in diagrams, with the side of the white pieces next to him. It is then read as one would read the lines on a page, the rows of squares being regarded as the lines, beginning with black's queen's rook square. Thus the position in game number 3, of the Ruy Lopez opening, the diagram of which is given on page 50, would be recorded as follows, beginning with the top row and counting from left to right, the first 5 squares, namely black's QR, QKD, QB, Q, and K's squares are vacant. This fact would be recorded simply by writing the number 5. The next square is occupied by the black king, and this would be recorded by a small K, small italics being used for the black pieces and pawns, while Roman capitals are used for those of white. The remaining 2 squares of this row are vacant, which would be recorded by writing the figure 2. The entire upper row would therefore be recorded by 3 symbols, thus, 5K2. In like manner the next row would be recorded thus, 2 page 2 RPP. The records of the other rows would be as follows, 3rd, 2 page 5, 4th, /5 RP, 5th, /circumflex accent 2, 6th, IPBB3 R, 7th, page 2 PIPPI, 8, R3K, 3, If these be written together, the records of they were marked off by semicolons. We have the following complete record of the position. Move 26. RK84, Steinitz. 5 circumflex accent to 2 /2 R//2/5 /5 RP4 //2 IPB circumflex accent 3 R page to pit PR 3K3 Max Judd. This may be abbreviated by adding together the numbers at the end of each row and the beginning of the next, and ignoring altogether the divisions into rows. Thus, move 26. RK84, Steinitz. 5/4/2 R//2/5 /5 RP4 //3 PB circumflex accent 3 RP2 PPIR 3K3 Max Judd. In like manner the following problem would be recorded, thus the letter H being used for knight, to avoid the confusion which is liable to arise between K and KD. The notation XIX, not abbreviated, 8/5/2 pike ASI circumflex accent JQ2, Kate, 6SI, Kate, mate into, abbreviated, by 3/2 page 7 Kasajki 6S17. To moves. A test by which errors would often be detected is that if each letter representing a piece or pawn be counted as 1, the sum total of every recorded position must be 64, the number of squares on the board. GRINGMUTH's telegraphic code. This code is the invention of Mr. D. Grimuth, the leading Russian problem composer, and has been adopted in several matches. An account of it may be found in La Stratégique, the Times Democrat of New Orleans, the International Chess Magazine, and the Chess Players Annual. By means of it two different moves can be combined into one word for transmission. If telegraphing only one game, the first 2 syllables would represent white's move, and the last 2 syllables black's answer. In the match between London and St. Petersburg, in which 2 games were simultaneously contested, the 2 first syllables represented the move in the game in which the party sending the despatch had the first move, and the 2 last syllables the move of the same party in the game in which their adversaries had the first move. The squares are designated as in the following diagram, and each move is designated by giving the square from which the piece or pawn is moved, followed by the square to which it is moved. By an extension of the code suggested by E.D. Noers in the Times Democrat, the letter C, added to the last syllable, designates check. The letter T added to the last syllable means takes F. Similarly, P means takes pawn and passant. 1 added to the symbols for the kings and rooks squares means castles. Q, R, B, K, added to the last syllable indicate that upon reaching the last row becomes, respectively, the queen, rook, bishop, or knight, and finally M means mate, and S, stalemate. Black, MW, 8, E, XX. The laws of the game. Chapter III. The laws of the game. We approve in the main of the Code of Laws of the British Chess Association, which has been adopted in many chess congresses. The chessboard. The board must be so placed during play that each combatant has a white square on his right-hand corner. If, during the progress of a game, either player discovers that the board has been improperly placed, he may insist on its being adjusted. The chessmen. If, at any time in the course of a game, it is found that the men were not properly placed, or that one or more of them were omitted at the beginning, the game in question must be annulled. If, at any time, it is discovered that a man has been dropped off the board, and moves have been made during its absence, such moves shall be retracted and the man restored. If the players cannot agree as to the square on which it should be replaced, the game must be annulled. The right of move and choice of color. The right of making the first move, and if either player requires it of choosing the color, which shall be retained throughout the sitting, must be decided by lot. In any series of games between the same players at one sitting, each shall have the first move alternately in all games, whether won or drawn. In an annulled game, the player who had the first move in that game, shall move first in the next, commencing out of turn. If a player makes the first move in a game when it is not his turn to do so, the game must be annulled, if the error has been noticed before both players have pledged the fourth move. After 4 moves on each side have been made, the game must be played out as it stands. Playing 2 moves in succession, If, in the course of a game, the player moves a man when it is not his turn to play, he must retract the said move, and after his adversary has moved, must play the man wrongly moved, if it can be played legally. Touch and move. The player must never touch any of the men except when it is his turn to play, or except when he touches a man for the purpose of adjusting it, in which latter case, he must, before touching it, say, "I adjust" or words to that effect. The player who touches with his hand except accidentally one of his own men when it is his turn to play, must move it, if it can be legally moved, unless, before touching it, he says, "I adjust," as above, and a player who touches one of his adversary's men, under the same conditions, must take it, if he can legally do so. If, in either case, the move cannot be legally made, the offender must move his king, but, in the event of the king having no legal move, there shall be no penalty. If a player hold a man in his hand, undecided upon which square to play it, his adversary may require him to replace it, until he has the laws of the game XXI decided on its destination. That man, however, must be moved. If a player, when it is his turn to play, touch with his hand except accidentally or in castling more than one of his own men, he must play New York one of them legally movable that his opponent southeast elects. If, under the same circumstances, he touches two or more of the adversary's men, he must capture whichever of them his antagonist chooses, provided it can be legally taken. If it happen that none of the men so touched can be moved or captured, the offender must move his king, but, if the king cannot be legally moved, there shall be no penalty. False moves and illegal moves. If a player makes a false move, that is, either by playing a man of his own to a square to which it cannot be legally moved, or by capturing an adverse man by a move which cannot be legally made, he must, at the choice of his opponent, and according to the case, either move his own man legally, capture the man legally, or move any other man legally movable. If, in the course of a game, an illegality be discovered not involving a king being in check and the move on which it was committed has been replied to, and not more than 4 moves on each side has been made subsequent, like all these latter moves, including that on which the illegality was committed, must be detracted. If more than 4 moves on each side have been made, the game must be played out as it stands. Check. The player must audibly say check when he makes a move which puts the hostile king in check. The mere announcement of check shall have no signification if check be not actually given. If check be given but not announced, and the adversary makes a move which obviates the check, the move must stand. If check be given and announced, and the adversary neglects to obviate it, he shall not have the option of capturing the checking piece or of covering, but must move his king out of check. But if the king has no legal move, there shall be no penalty. If in the course of a game, it be discovered that a king has been left in check for 1 or more moves on either side, all the moves subsequent to that on which the check was given, must be retracted. Should these not be remembered, the game must be annulled. Enforcing penalties. The player is not bound to enforce a penalty. This means that he does not subject himself in turn to a penalty by not claiming one due to him. This, however, only applies to contests between 2 players, but in tournaments and team matches it is often specially provided that in the interest of other competitors no player has a right knowingly to waive a penalty to which his opponent would be legitimately subjected. A penalty can only be enforced by a player before he has touched a man in reply. Should he touch a man in reply in consequence of a false or illegal move of his opponent, or a false cry of check, he shall not be compelled to move that man, and his right to enforce a penalty shall remain. When the king is moved as a penalty, it cannot castle on that move. Castling. In castling, the player shall move king and rook simultaneously, or shall touch the king first. If he touch the rook first, he must not quit it before having touched the king, or his opponent may claim the move of the rook as a complete. The laws of the game. Move. When the odds of either rook or both rooks are given, the player giving the odds shall be allowed to move his king as in castling, and as though the rooks were on the board. Counting 50 moves. The player may call upon his opponent to draw the game, or to make him within 50 moves on each side, whenever his opponent persists in repeating a particular check, or a series of checks, or the same line of play. In some tournaments this rule has been altered to the effect that after 6 such repetitions of checks, series of moves, or the same line of play, a draw may be claimed on either side, or whenever he has a king alone on the board, or a king and queen, king and rook jd, u tilde against an equal or superior force, king and bishop, king and knight, king and two bishops, king and two knights I against king and queen, king, bishop and knight, vertical line. And in all analogous cases, and whenever one player considers that his opponent can force the game, or that neither side can win it, he has the right of submitting the case to the umpire or bystanders, who shall decide whether it is won for the 50-move counting. Should he not be mated within the 50 moves, he may claim that the game shall proceed. Pawn taking in passing. XII. Should a player be left with no other move than to take a pawn in passing, he shall be bound to play that move. Queen the pawn. XII. When a pawn has reached the 8th square, the player has the option of selecting the piece, whether such piece has been previously lost or not, whose names and powers it shall then assume, or of deciding that it shall remain a pawn. Abandoning the game. XIV. If a player abandon the game, discontinue his moves, voluntarily resign, willfully upset the board, or refuse to abide by these laws, or to submit to the decision of the umpire, he must be considered to have lost the game. The umpire or bystanders. XV. The umpire shall have the authority to decide any question whatever that may arise in the course of a game, but must never interfere except when appealed to. He must always apply the laws as herein expressed, and neither assume the power of modifying, nor of deviating from them in particular cases according to his own judgment. When a question is submitted to the umpire or bystanders by both players, their decision shall be final and binding upon both players. The term bystander shall comprise any impartial player of eminence who can't be appealed to, absent or present. Technical terms. XXII. Chapter IB. Technical terms. I cancelling. Each player has the privilege once in the game only, subject to certain restrictions, of moving his king to squares in conjunction with placing on the square which the king has passed one of his rooks. This operation, a compound move, is called castling. Position before castling queen's side. Position before castling king's side /II. Them H9 miles IPR. Position after castling queen's side. Position after castling king's side. millimeters. Castling can only be performed subject to the following restrictions. I. The king must not be in check. 2. He must not pass over or alight on a square commanded by a hostile man. 3. Neither king nor rook must have been previously moved. 4. No piece must intervene between the king and rook. In Italy the following method of castling was, and, we believe, is still practiced. The king and rook can be either placed on any square within the limits of and include greater than in G their own two, provided they cross over each other. Thus, castling may be effected. XXIV. Technical terms. In 16 different ways, viz. In 6 ways on the king's side, and in 10 ways on the queen's side. According to Stanton, castling is only a modern innovation. In the Middle Ages, the king had the privilege of being played on his first move, under somewhat similar restrictions, to squares in any direction, from the square on which he originally stood, whether the intervening square was vacant or occupied. 2. Queen the pawn. The pawn is queened when it has reached the last square of a file on which it is advancing, or when it captures a hostile piece on the 8th row. It may then be exchanged for a queen or rook or a bishop or knight. Thus a player may have 2 or more queens, rooks, bishops or knights on the board at the same time, or he may refuse promotion to his pawn. The Committee of the London International Chess Congress, of 1862, decided that a player should have the option of refusal of promotion, as positions may occur in which promotion would involve the loss of the game, whereas, by refusal of promotion a draw could be obtained. The following position illustrating a case of that kind is quoted from Lowenthal's Book of the London Chess Congress, of 1862, Black. Here, it is white's move, and if he capture the rook with the pawn and claim the queen or any other piece, black takes the bishop with the pawn and checkmates him next move. But, if he refused promotion, the game is drawn, since if then black captured the bishop, white is stalemated, and if he move either pawn or king, white takes the knight's pawn with the bishop and draws, e.g. IPXR remaining the pawn. IPQ KD4, to be extra at KDE etc. We approve of the decision of the Committee of the London Chess Congress of 1862, although the dummy pawn rule was denounced by some authorities. In Italy the pawn was formerly always retained at the 8th square as a temporary dummy pawn until a piece was captured for which it could be exchanged. It sometimes happens that a player can win a game by claiming a minor piece or 8. Rook when he would lose by claiming the queen. 3. Check. The king is in check when he is attacked by a hostile piece or pawn. And as his capture is not permissible according to the laws of chess, warning must be given by the opponent calling check. One of three things must then be done. I. The king must move out of check. 2. The hostile man that checks him must be taken. Technical terms. XXV. 3. The piece or pawn must be interposed between the king and the attacking hostile piece or pawn. If none of these things can be done the game is lost, the king being checkmated. 4. Simple check occurs when the king is directly attacked by a single piece or pawn. 5. Double check is brought about when the king is attacked by two pieces at the same time owing to a discovered check. 6. Discovered check occurs when, by the removal of a piece or pawn, check is unmasked from another piece. 7. Perpetual check occurs when the attacked king cannot escape from one check without rendering himself liable to another. Circumflex accent 8. Stalemate is brought about when the king, although not at the moment in check, is so situated that he cannot be moved without going into check and when no other piece or pawn can be moved. The game then is drawn. 9. Smothered mate, or fiddler's legacy, occurs when the king is so hemmed in by his own men that he cannot move out of check from a hostile knight, which is the only piece that can administer this mate. 10. Pen prize. A French term, signifying exposed to capture. When any undefended piece or pawn is attacked by a hostile man, it is said to be en prize, i.e. liable to be taken. 11. JAVUBE. Two other French words, meaning I adjust la vie to be, used by a player when he touches a man to adjust its position on the board, without intending to move it, if it be one of his own men, or to capture it, if it be one of his opponent's men. 12. Forced move. When a player has only one move at his disposal that is called a forced move. 13. False move. Any illegal move, such as castling when the king is in check or has been already moved, or moving the bishop like a knight, or a knight like a bishop or rook, is called a false move. 14. Minor pieces. The knights and bishops are termed minor pieces to distinguish them from the queen and rooks. 15. Rows and file. When the men are arranged at the commencement of the game they are in two ranks. The horizontal ranks of squares are termed rows or ranks, and the vertical squares files. 1-6. The exchange. Winning or losing the rook for a minor piece is called winning or losing the exchange. 17. Gambit. The word derived from the Italian, signifying to trip up in wrestling, used in chess phraseology in certain openings, in which a player sacrifices a pawn for the sake of obtaining an attack. The pawn thus sacrificed is called the gambit pawn. 1-8. Doubled pawn. Two pawns of the same color on the same file are called doubled pawns. 19. Isolated pawn. The pawn which cannot be supported by other pawns and stands alone on a file is called an isolated pawn. XXVI technical terms. 20. Passed pawn. The pawn is called passed when there is no hostile pawn to prevent its march to the 8th square. 21. To take and pass and or in passing. On his first move in the game the pawn has the privilege of advancing 2 squares. But, if in thus advancing, he passes a square attacked by a hostile pawn, which is posted at a 5th square, counting from the opposite side, he is liable to be captured in passing by the said pawn, which may intercept him in his passage as if he had only moved 1 square. For instance, after the moves IPK4, IPK4, to KKD63, to QKDPS, 3PQ4, 3PX4, 4B84, for kd63, 5p k5, 5p q4, white's king's pawn may capture the pawn which has just advanced 2 squares as if it had only moved 1 square, which means that white may take off the pawn at black's q4 and place his own king's pawn at black's q3. Compare diagram. Position after white's 6th move, pxp en passant or in passing. Black, white. But the capture en passant must be effected at once on the move, for the adverse pawn cannot be thus taken subsequently. Only pawns not pieces can capture or be captured en passant. The pawn was not allowed formerly the privilege of taking en passant, the rule having been first adopted in Spain in the time of Ruy Lopez, and afterwards legalized in France, England and Germany. Until quite recently it was not allowed in Italy. 22. Drawn game. When neither player can checkmate his adversary, the game is drawn. The following are instances in which this occurs: I. By perpetual check. 2. When both players persist in repeating the same moves. 3. By stalemate. 4. When the stronger force cannot give checkmate within the number of moves specified in Law XI. 5. When the forces on either side are equal, or nearly so, as queen versus queen, rook versus rook or bishop, etc. Chess as a training of mind and how to improve. XXVII. Chapter V. Chess as a training of mind and how to improve. The practice of our noble pastime is in no way influenced by any element of chance, excepting that of temporary individual dispositions, which after all forms the most important element of strength, and the results of chess contests are therefore strictly based on a scientific and logical foundation. Both parties are placed on a perfectly equal footing on starting, as regards the forces and their respective powers, and the same rules regulate the movements or actions of the combatants. It is, therefore, purely a battle of the reasoning qualities that decides the issue in a game of chess, and the infinite variety of possible combinations in playing the game affords the widest scope for the exercise, and, therefore, the training of the logical as well as the imaginative faculties of mind. Since the introduction of our noble pastime in civilized countries, a great number of the foremost thinkers, warriors and statesmen of different nationalities have been attracted by its charms, and some of them have devoted as much attention to the study and practice of chess as to the cultivation of art and literature. In our time the game was becoming more widely popular among intelligent people in different countries, and it is almost universally recognized as a healthy mental exercise, which in its effects on the intellectual faculties is akin to that of physical gymnastics on the conservation and development of bodily strength. Moreover, the cultivation of the game seems also to exercise a direct influence on the physical condition of chess players and the prolongation of their lives, for most of the celebrated chess masters and authors on the game have reached a very old age, and have preserved their mental powers unimpaired in some instances up to their very last moments. It has also been computed that the average length of life of the general devotees of the game is the highest in comparison to any other class of men whose duration of life has been systematically subjected to statistical observation*. This can be no mere coincidence, and, incongruous as it may seem to connect longevity with the study and practice of chess, we believe the conclusion to be a sound one, which can be placed from experience on rational grounds. It is only natural that men gifted with intellectual abilities will favor a mental time that exercises the highest qualities of mind, in a similar manner as men who are endowed with great physical powers will be attracted by recreations and amusements that develop and maintain their bodily strength. Once a chess player becomes initiated in the elements of the game, he derives an extraordinary amount of entertainment and pleasure from pursuing it, and a healthy spirit of emulation stimulates his ambition to become proficient in the noble pastime. He is then sure to learn by experience that any habits that are injurious to general health will also greatly disturb his capacity to do his best and to improve as a player, and that modes of living that are detrimental to a sound condition of body must be rigorously checked, or else his play deteriorates. On the old maxim, mens sana in corpore sano, it may therefore reasonably be assumed that as a general rule, with very few exceptions, ardent devotees of the game will be intelligent. We made this statement on the authority of Mr. J.A.S. D. Seguin, chess editor of the Times Democrat of New Orleans. XXVII Chess as a training of mind and how to improve. Gent people, who are possessed of healthy organizations, and as the practice of our pastime is conducive to habits that are beneficial to the preservation of good health, it will also greatly influence the prolongation of life. Some of the foremost Tianenckers have spoken in the highest terms of the game of chess as an intellectual amusement and as a mark of great capacity, and some of the greatest celebrities of different nations has devoted time and attention to the study and practice of its intricacies. Goethe, in his translation of Le Nephew de Rameau by Diderot, endorses the opinion of the celebrated French philosopher who describes it as the touchstone of the human brain. Prince Bismarck, in disparagement of mere rhetorical ability, once remarked that great orators, as a rule, can't neither play a good game of chess or whist, which shows that this preeminent statesman thought more highly of the capacity for playing games of skill as a test of acumen than he did of the oratorical faculty. President Grevy of France is a great lover and supporter of the game, and during his presidential term he offered prizes from the public funds for national and international chess tournaments in France. Buckle, the author of the History of Civilization, was one of the greatest chess masters of our age. Leibniz, Voltaire, Lessing, Mendelssohn, Alfred de Musset, Frederick the Great, Napoleon I, and William I, were fond of the game, and most of those famous men are reported to have acquired great skill as players. The literature of the game belongs to the oldest on record in many languages, and its rapid increase in our time has been greatly instrumental in reviving the general popularity of our pastime, as it has facilitated the study of the openings and of practical examples of play between masters. The spread of the game all over the civilized world is, however, chiefly due to the inauguration of international chess congresses and matches between experts, which from time to time are organized in the principal capitals of Europe and the American continent. These public exhibitions of chess skill have been watched with the keenest attention by lovers of the game literally all over the face of the globe, for not alone the results of play, but also whole records of games have been communicated through the medium of the newspaper press and the cable to the widest distances on our planet. Fresh talents have been constantly drawn out by those public tests of strength which have formed the training schools for some of the greatest masters of our time, who have developed novel, theoretical and practical ideas that greatly help students of the game to overcome the chief difficulties in mastering the intricacies of our pastime. These difficulties were in former days considered quite insurmountable, and proficiency in the art of human reason, as chess has been aptly termed by Gustavus Adolphus Duke August, June, of Brunswick, was held to be the special privilege of only a very few. But undeniable experience has shown that prominence and even excellence in chess may be acquired in a manner similar to that in which proficiency may be obtained in other accomplishments that require mental exertion, and that with proper training and study the large majority of learners may generally improve their chess strength up to a very high degree at least, and sometimes to mastery. At first sight the infinite variety of combinations that are possible on the chessboard may appear a most discouraging obstacle in the way of achieving success in the game, and it is only due to quote in that respect the following extract from an article. It is due to state that the first example of bringing the telegraph into requisition for reporting all the moves of games of chess was set by the New York Herald during the match between Messrs. Steinitz and Martinez, played in Philadelphia in 1882. This most enterprising journal has since published cable reports of the whole games played in the London tournament of 1886, and during the contest between Messrs. Steinitz and Scarborough, at Havana, in the beginning of 1889. Chess as a Training of Mind and How to Improve. XXIX. Entitled The Inexhaustibility of Chess, by Mr. Quinn Anthony, of Hereford, which first appeared in the Chess Players' Chronicle of 1878. To estimate the actual number of ways of playing even a very few moves is beyond the power of calculation, but to get something of an approximation to that number is very simple. Taking a variation of each of the openings as in Cook's synopsis, /D find that the first player has an average of 28, 30, and 33 ways of playing the second, third, and fourth moves respectively, 29, 31, and 33 being the corresponding numbers for the second player. Of course both players have a choice of 20 moves on their first on the hypothesis that the number of replies opened at each move is always the same whatever the preceding move may have been, and that the foregoing figures give those numbers, the number of possible ways of Playing the first 4 moves only on each side would be 318,979,564,000. If, then, anyone were to play without cessation, at the rate of 1 set a minute, it would take him more than 600,000 years to go through them all. It would be difficult to say whether the above number is in excess or defect of the true one, but perhaps we may safely affirm that it is not likely to be out more than 20%, either way. When we bear in mind that the number of possible ways increases for many moves, some 30-fold for each move added, it is plain that the number of ways of playing 20 or 30 moves on each side is so great as to utterly transcend the grasp of the imagination. No doubt the ratio of the plausible to the possible number of moves at every stage is usually small, but after every allowance has been made for that fact, the varieties of play still remain enormous. In a very rough way, we may easily extend our survey. After the first 4 moves in a common form of the Guilherme piano opening, White has 33 possible moves at command, and after 8 frequently played moves in the Evans gambit, he has a choice of 32 moves. Let us assume then for convenience of calculation that, for the next 6 moves on each side after the first 4 on each side, there is always a choice of 30 different ways of playing a hypothesis, probably below rather than above the actual fact. We thus get, by combination with the result quoted above, that the number of ways of playing the first 10 moves on each side is 169,518, 829,100, 544,000. These figures are probably in defect rather than in excess of the actual number. On their basis, however, and considering the population of the whole world to be 1,483 million, Levasseurs estimate more than 2 billion so-fars would be needed to go through them all, even if every man, woman and child on the face of the globe played without cessation for that enormous period at the rate of 1 set per clinic and no set was repeated. In this connection it will be interesting to mention that the first player has the choice of 20 different moves to start with, namely, the moves of the 8 dawns 1 are 2 squares and of each of the 2 knights to 2 different squares, whilst the opus 1 and has the option of 20 different answers to each one of the first player's 20 moves. Here are, therefore, 400 different ways of making the first move on each side without roasting any further, and 400 is therefore the unit in the arithmetical progression for purpose of calculating the number of combinations that are possible in playing the aim. But it should be remembered that there is a like infinity, from L-he mathematical greater than point of view, in the art of music, which has nevertheless become popular, and it has greater than been found that the talent for music, which is almost universal among civilized nations, can be cultivated and extended by study and practice. We believe that this is also true of chess, and that knowledge of the game could be made even easier of acquirement by a great majority of people than it is now, if rational modes of improvement were be adopted. The advice which we offer on the subject is, in the first place, that a learner seek as much as possible to play on even terms with superior players. From greater than experience and observation we feel sure that he will learn much faster in this manner than by taking odds. The latter method of practice engenders the habit on the part of the DDS receiver of exchanging pieces without any other motive than to reduce the forces. Lee may also with comparative impunity commit many mistakes, any one of which would surely cost him the game if he started on even terms, and the object of the student ought not to be so much to win games as to train himself to play correctly. By taking DDS the player loses the opportunity to observe the finer points of play of his adversary. Our host on account of his inferiority in force cannot always afford to adopt the best strategy. XXX Chess as a training of mind and how to improve, and is more apt to resort to lines of play which he knows to be unsound, relying on the inability of the weaker player to perceive the correct reply. Moreover, the openings in games at odds are quite different from those adopted in even games, and, therefore, the odds receiver is not advancing in one important branch of chess knowledge. For these reasons we also think that handicap tournaments ought to be discouraged in chess clubs, and if it be desirable at all to offer special inducements of chances of prizes to weaker players who are not satisfied with the opportunities of better practice with their superiors on even terms, then the odds might be given by a method which we believe was first adopted in the Bohemian Chess Club of Prague, namely, to give the advantage of half a game or more in the score to the weaker players. One thing that we would especially urge upon the chess student is that regularity of study and practice very much facilitates making rapid progress. The player by fits and starts will scarcely ever improve, and it is much better to devote to chess 1 hour per day for 6 consecutive days than 6 hours one day in the week. In order to strengthen the powers of chess perception and memory, a good habit to cultivate is that of playing over from recollection one's own games, or more especially selected and well annotated published games played by masters. One great advantage of the published games is that when the memory occasionally fails, it may be refreshed by reference to the publication. A very important point is always to observe strictly the law of touch and move. But the temptation to take back the move is very great with a beginner, and it has been found desirable for this purpose to play for a small stake, as this causes it to be considered a point of honor to play strictly according to the rules. This practice has become usual in the principal chess clubs of Europe, as well as in the larger cities of the United States and in Havana. Other advantages of playing for a small stake are that it tends to promote greater care in the play and to check comments or suggestions from the bystanders. The game of chess is so utterly unsuited for gambling that no danger is incurred by the practice, and the players usually know each other's strength, and either the score is about even or the weaker player fully expects to lose, but is willing to pay a fee for the amusement and instruction which he receives from his adversary. In advance of a separate treatise on problems which we intend to publish in another volume of this work, we may state that the study of this beautiful branch of our science is extremely useful for the purpose of developing and increasing strength in practical play. It is especially the faculty of precision which has to be exercised absolutely in the study of problems, whereas in the game the winning process may often be effected in many different ways. Yet quite as often it requires the greatest exactitude of calculation to make sure of a plan to be adopted in actual play, and the study of compositions where the utmost power of the forces has to be employed in the fewest number of moves is therefore a splendid training for the purpose. Some of the greatest players, like Morphy, Anderson, Blackburn, etc., have devoted great attention to this subject, which has grown to almost a separate art, and it is especially noteworthy that a more brilliant style is usually acquired by masters who combine practice over the board with the study of problems. This is only natural, as the brilliant combinations mostly occur in the direct king's side attack, and the various beautiful mating positions which are brought out in problems lead, therefore, to the conception of similar ideas in actual play. But we wish to point out particularly that, though it is better for the student to try and solve problems, this is by no means absolutely necessary in order to derive great benefit from the study of that branch of chess. Especially the beginner will find it most entertaining and instructive to compare over the board the compositions with the solutions from any problem collection by first-class authors, or from periodicals where usually the solution's vertical line. Till Modern School and its Tendency. XXXI. Dark published in full in the next number after the problem has first appeared. Advanced students may, in a similar way, assist their perception by looking at the key move in a problem of more than 2 moves, but all the variations ought to be carefully played over or worked out. In that way, and provided that this be done with great regularity, about 3 or 4 problems per day, the student will soon become familiar with many leading ideas in very difficult problems, and after some time he will be able to solve them almost at a glance from the diagram. Chapter VI. The Modern School and its Tendency. The object of the game, as already explained, is to checkmate the adverse king as early as x greater than s is able, and the whole play of each party has to be made subservient to that end. Theorists and practical experts have naturally attempted to effect this purpose, or at any rate to gain some material advantage by a direct attack against the hostile king in the vertical line opening, and in numerous instances they have succeeded in proving that pawns and pieces may be given up very early in the game for the purpose of harassing the adverse king and with the effect of accomplishing the mate, or at least of recovering material greater in value than what had been temporarily sacrificed. Generally such attacks are essayed and practiced by the first player, or advocated in analysis for the same party, and it was Bill Weiss admitted that the second player cannot obtain such opportunities in the opening excepting when a fault is committed by the adversary. but later researches and practical re-alls among masters have proved that such sacrifices early in the game, even of the first greater than party, are mostly unsound, or else they succeed only in consequence of moves on the other side which can be demonstrated as errors of development. In fact, it is now conceded by all experts that by proper play on both sides the ultimate issue of a game ought to be a draw, and that the right of making the first move might secure that issue, but is not worth the value of a pawn. It therefore follows that, theoretically as well as practically, among first-class masters of equal strength, not a single pawn can be given up by either party at any stage of the game without at least creatively endangering the result, unless it can be soon recovered. But, moreover, it has been proven beyond any doubt that, irrespective of an attack against the adverse king, mere weakness of any square on any part of the board of which we shall give some further explanation will cause great inconvenience and trouble, and very often will be Italy. In the middle of the game such points will generally be occupied by a hostile piece that will exercise a menacing attitude, and will be extremely difficult to dislodge. Which often gives the adversary time to strengthen his position, either by bringing more his forces to bear on such a point or by obtaining greater freedom for his other pieces for the formation of an attack in another direction. A game will generally be greater than sane when such advantage ground can be taken by the opponent on the king's side or in center before the exchange of several pieces have been effected, but such weak blowers are also dangerous in the ending after the exchange of queens and rooks, and hen the kings are brought into play, for it is then mostly important to gain moves with pawns, and the side that is free from weak points will have a great advantage for that purpose. But it is specially as regards the powers of the king that the modern school deviates from the teachings and practice of old theorists and chess masters, and we consider it in the modern school and the principles of play established that the king must be treated as a strong piece both for attack and defense. This means that so far from the king requiring great protection early in the game, a few simple precautions which we shall further explain will render him so safe that any attempt at attacking his wing will be more dangerous for the opponent than for himself. For such attacks can only be formed either by advancing pawns on that wing, in which case those pawns become weak for the ending, if the attack fails, or else by directing several pieces against the adverse king and thus deploying them for defensive action or some other point of the board where the opponent may break in with superior forces. But, moreover, several forms of openings have been developed in which the king, though apparently on the defensive for some time, is brought into action early in the game, and after withstanding a seemingly vehement attack, obtains perfect security with the superiority position generally for the ending, by means of forcing the exchange of heavy pieces after having gained some advantage in material circumflex accent, but sometimes also in the middle game, with nearly all the principal forces of both parties on the board. These are in the main the leading ideas of the modern school, as it has been called, though in fact, they formulate no more than an extension in general of maxims of play which with the intuitive instinct of genius have already been adopted by old masters and theorists in some of the openings. For instance, the bishop's gambit and the Salvic gambit showed that though the king has to move early and is deprived of the right castling, a strong attack can be formed with the minor pieces, going to the queen b2 brought out early into the adverse game. Likewise the French defense on the very first move of the second player obviates beyond any manner of doubt, for a great number of moves, all sacrificing tactics and even a combination play on the part of the first player, and calls at once for the very treatment that is now advocated as the classical one by BC play on both sides, and which consists in the steady development without any sacrifice of material, circumspective attention to the balance of forces and of position on all parts of the board, and the accumulation of small advantages if possible. The principal thesis of the modern school may be briefly summarized thus. Underscored among first-class masters, its capture of the adverse king is the ultimate but not the first object of the game. And by best play on both sides the draw ought to be the legitimate result. When it is remembered that a mere alteration in the order of a few consecutive moves sometimes leads to an enormous number of new variations, it will be easily understood that a change of a whole system involved the introduction of innumerable new lines of play and the development of novel ideas that were often in direct opposition to popular notions and tastes. Objections have been raised against the reform chiefly on the ground that its tendencies are calculated to abolish or at any rate to reduce brilliant circumflex accent combinations, which it is assumed are the special characteristics of the direct attack against the king. We can only answer that this is a sort of sentimental objection that ought to exercise but very little influence on our game, which is essentially of a scientific character. We entirely agree with Baron von Hayden-Bunderlose, who lays down the sound maxim: the simplest and the shortest way of winning is the best. Correctness of judged vertical alignment and calculation ought to be chiefly cultivated in the exercise of our pastime, and W merely shows primitive taste to prefer brilliancy to soundness. Elegance of style while opportunity arises is no doubt an attribute of a great master, but the fact should never be lost sight of that the brilliant sacrificing combinations can only occur when either side had committed some grave error of judgment in the disposition of his forces, and therefore only very rarely in important games between first-class masters. Thus, for instance, the matches of Morphy against his most prominent opponent, such brilliant sacrifice 1 occurred only in 2 games out of 63, and the extraordinary elegance and dash of Morphy's style was successfully shown in his blindfold performances, games at odds and scytoplasgy. Relative value of pieces and principles of play XXXII against more or less inferior opponents. The same observation applies to the practice of chess masters of our time, who have greatly increased in number, and as the game has also grown more popular, the opportunities arising for first-class players of displaying their ingenuity against less skilled opponents are more frequent. In our opinion, the brilliancies have in no way been reduced in proportion, and on the contrary they have become common even among players who do not belong to the very first rank.